We're just waiting on Jasper Bark. Should be here about 5 minutes or so. Jasper Bark. Oh my gosh.
Hello, sir.
The man, the legend, the
The lunch money stealer.
the lunch what? Okay, so I
Money theft.
I I was not aware of such imputations or rumors, sir.
Scurrilous, scandalous rumors. And not a word of truth to any of them, or most of them.
Well, yes. I mean,
It's
I've
all
been
of them.
I've been accused of such things as astral rape, you know, rape and murder by via telekinesis. I was stalked for more than a decade by literally by a professional clown. So,
Wow.
wow, right? There, I've been accused of everything, including being a convicted a sex criminal, of being investigated by the FBI, of plagiarizing my own anthologies. So
Yeah.
it's been a wild ride, but the the really positive thing is that I've made so many incredible friends along the way. I mean, like
That's what counts.
that's what counts. I was kind of mentored by people like, Craig Spector and Paul M. Salmon and and John Skip was very kind to me in the beginning, Billy Martin and Caitlin R. Kiernan and John Shirley, so and then
Those are some huge names in our field,
yeah,
and some
exactly.
amazing talents as well.
They're such I mean, I so how it all started was like I was living in Pasadena in it was 1994 or so. And I've been a huge fan of I mean I read religiously. I would read like Weird Tales,
Yeah.
the David J. Scow issue, in particular, or you know what I mean. I read and then I got on sort of I was so excited about Clive Barker. I mean, when Clive Barker hit in in the 80s. I was an undergrad at UC Davis, and I just remember the books of blood, not the original covers that he drew, but the sort of the lurid kind of ghoulish Halloween mask covers that the American publisher put out, and they were shite covers, but the contents were incredible, and it was sort of like a fucking mind blow,
Um,
mind fuck, right?
Just to say, they weren't the original covers. I used to have all the original covers and all the original books when they came out
Right,
because I used to be a subscriber to a UK magazine called Halls of Horror, which
right.
was set by a guy called Des Skin, who launched a whole bunch of a comic called Warrior, which began stories like V for Vendetta
Yeah,
and Miracle Man, and he had a companion horror thing called Halls of Horror, and the writer Ramsey Campbell used to
yeah,
write a regular column in it. And in the back of that, he said, next month, this book is coming out by this new guy. You won't have heard of him. He's called Clive Barker.
yes,
Uh, it's going to be called Books of Blood. It'll be in 6 volumes. You have to go and buy it. So I ran to my local bookstore and ordered it. And it was like a little, it's grey cover paperback with a really pathetic, slightly distorted cover, a photograph on the front of somebody's face going. And it was Book of
right.
Blood Volume 1. I was about 12 years old at the time, and I had
Right.
never read anything like this, particularly the last story in The Hills to Cities. Absolutely blew my mind.
Right. A little known fact, but people like the Beat generation, particularly William S. Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, were huge
Mm.
influences on Clive. I believe that in fact that phrase "in the hills, the cities" comes from Burroughs, as have had so many people have been inspired by Burroughs, including one
Wow.
one of our authors. And I don't know if you've seen some of my promos, but okay,
Mhm.
so I'll just do a little show and tell. So, in around 1983 or so, there was a movie that came out that starred David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve and Susan Sarandon with a guest appearance by Anne Magnuson as the New Wave Slut, dancing to a little number called
The
They Are
Hunger.
Dead. Yes. And in fact, one of our contributing authors
Hmm.
is none other than David J. Haskins.
Right. Okay.
Right? Okay,
Yeah.
so for real though.
He did the soundtrack, well, the opening shot of I think it's Pete
Right.
Shelley inside the
Yes.
cage. Bela Lugosi's dead.
Right.
David was one of the writers of that, wasn't he?
Um, in
Of the music for Bela Lugosi's dead. I think
um
he wrote the music and
Bowie?
the singer Pete. No, wrote the music for Bela Lugosi's Dead, the
Yeah,
opening shot of
right,
The
right. What
Hunger.
what what happened was that this is really really interesting sort of origin story for that is that if you watch the video the sort of the video for the original cover that original, when you're talking about Bauhaus, they stole everything, which is amazing. It's sort of like they're postmodern thieves, right? Like Kathy Acker, so they stole the Bauhaus logo, they stole the Bauhaus name, and they were actually threatened with a lawsuit by the Bauhaus, the art movement, right?
Didn't
And
know that.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's absolutely true. And so the that shot that they did of Peter Murphy in the cage, right? That's
Hmm.
actually it was taken from the video for Ziggy Stardust, their cover for Ziggy Stardust.
Was it?
Yes, and actually, and Tony Scott, the director of The
Mhm.
Hunger, who also directed Top Gun and is unfortunately no longer with us. He saw Bauhaus in this little, club in the UK, and he remarked that he thought that Peter Murphy had this sort of ethereal vampire quality, and he thought it would be perfect for this movie he was making called The Hunger, which was based on the Whitley Strieber novel, and Whitley Strieber was also a friend of Burroughs, interestingly enough. So there's all these different connections, and then David J got involved with Alan Moore and Genesis P. Orridge, who were part of this sort of occult order, right? So there's all these,
Genesis peerage. I think that's two different orders. It's the
yeah.
order of psychic youth is slightly different to Alan Moore and David J's relationship, I think.
Um,
But
um,
it is part of the whole kind of general British kind
it,
of occult scene.
it is absolutely. I mean, all I know is that David J says that he was sort of slightly deranged by his involvement with Alan Moore and Genesis. So we also, I mean, there's if I spent any time whatsoever, talking about our contributors, we would never get to you. So I'm going to just shelve that. But we're going to be obviously we're going to be talking because some of our contributors include Ramsey Campbell, so who is the master, right? The master. Also,
Oh, yeah.
also we're putting out a reboot of our one of our what do you call it when you've got your well we have several series that are really critically acclaimed, and one of them is the Floppy Shoes Apocalypse clown horror
Right.
anthology series, and that has people like H.R. Boldwood and Tara Van Flower from the bands Lycia and Typo Negative in it. And I would love to have a piece from you. I mean, if you're into like anything like clown horror, because we have a literal clown here to, with us, Krista Belisario, who's the National Beat Poet Laureate of Greece.
Wow.
So yeah, and we're reprinting. Ramsey has given us permission to reprint the chapter totems from Grin of the Dark, which is one of the great, clown horror classics, right?
Hmm. Almost definitely.
I'm also literally endorsed by the Church of Satan, so you might want to be a little bit wary. Uh, literally, this is a friend of mine uh, who's anyway. Her name is Sharon LeVay, and she is the head of the International Church of
Oh, wow.
Satan, right?
Is she the wife or the daughter of Anton?
She is neither. The relationship is like goes like this. So um, Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan in 1966, the year I was born, on Halloween Day, 1966, this is absolutely true. He founded the Church of Satan in San Francisco, and then his um, I believe his wife was Blanche Barton, and then their grandson was Stanton LaVey, who sort of carried on the legacy.
Mhm.
And then he married Sharon,
Yeah.
yeah, who became Sharon LaVey, and then Sharon is kind of continuing, the legacy. So she pretty much runs the show as far as Church of Satan these days.
Wow, how fascinating.
You
So
know,
she's his daughter-in-law.
She's his daughter-in-law, yeah. Or granddaughter-in-law of Anton LaVey, Hail Satan. So, and I've been, I just you're probably aware of this. I've been counseled not just by horror, but by Bizarro, like a total of 6 times have been murder threats against me. And I consider myself a cuddly guy, you know. I'm all about the peace and love. And, you know, this is my little, you know, the mini me pinhead, you know, your suffering will be cuddly even in heck. So let's see. I prepared this little thing, so I'm going to introduce you now.
Okay.
Okay. Where did I put that? Oh,
I
gee.
can't remember. I've completely forgotten. Sorry.
Right.
But you might have told me. You might have told me in a dream, but I woke up and forgot. Sorry.
Oh, that reminds me. This was several years ago, but oh, this is so funny. Like I had a dream. I had a dream where I was on a binge reading of, you know, of Ramsey Campbell. We've all been there, right? Ramsey Campbell
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the great master of the craft.
Oh, hell yeah.
And I was reading one of them. One of those stories involved a kind of like this very ethereal kind of like almost a ghost journey across the British countryside. And I had started having dreams featuring Ramsey, you know, and one of them, one of the, this is so funny. One of these days I'm going to turn this into a story. Is
Hmm.
that I was so I started visiting him at his house he lives across the Mersey in Liverpool, near another friend of mine who's actually my student. He goes by David Sisson. He's a up and coming, you know, splatterpunk guy. And anyway, so I visited him and it was just in the sort of the ethereal form, but I would manifest in his living room, and it would show up, and he was very very polite, but also you know a little bit irritated as one would be, you know, because you know a rabid fan of his just sort of showing up, you know, doing a dream journey, and then showing up in his living room, and so and um and I forget what happened in the dream, but I've had actually several, you know, Ramsey dreams.
How fascinating.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. I
So,
wonder if Ramses had several Alex dreams.
I, I mean, those are terrifying, you know, like because I'm a small bear as well. There's a whole origin story to that, which is I think you find very interesting. Speaking of, before I get to introducing you, um, we just had on the show 2 days ago a woman named Mimi Pond, who is not only a famous graphic novelist, right, but she is also the script writer of the very first episode of The Simpsons, which was
Wow,
called,
really?
yeah, which was called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. And actually, my dad is also a comics guy. He's an
Mhm.
inventor, and his name is Stephen M. Johnson. So you know, his like he was the one who turned me on to, you know, Crumb. And
Oh, okay,
from
yeah.
there, and he actually introduced me to Crumb when I was a kid. And it was like we were at the Whole Earth Festival in Sausalito, right, in 1980. And there was a couple of things that happened there where like he wanted me to see Ginsberg, right? So I was like 14 years old,
Wow.
right? And Ginsberg was like debuted Plutonian Ode. So I was like, this guy was like a, you know, fucking rock star of poetry.
Yeah.
I'd never seen anything like that. And then my dad says we would always get the Whole Earth Review because my dad was in on the ground floor of the Whole Earth Review, which is a spin-off of the Whole Earth catalog, right? So he was
Hmm.
there routinely with, you know, like Gary Snyder and Ginsberg and Crumb and you know, uh, all the guys. Another one of my mates, Are You Serious? Ken Goffman,
Wow.
later
Yeah.
founded, you know,
Monster
Monza
2000.
2000, right? Yeah. So, and he was, he was actually on Nothing Records, Trent Reznor's label for a while.
Was he really?
Yes. So Mimi is a friend of my dad's,
How fabulous.
right? And then also and she is a was big into Crumb. It was a huge influence on her. And so my dad actually introduced me to Crumb. And he said, are you our Crumb? It's like, who else has this sort of, looks like a fastidiously dressed, uh, you know,
Geography teacher.
geography teacher, right? Exactly. All Tweety and bend over with his Coke cock bottle. Well, that's a bizarre concept, cock bottle, right? Maybe you could do something with that.
Bottle bottom glasses.
Yes, exactly. They're like that. And he looked like he was trying to pop out of his own skin, right? And
Hmm.
and my dad's and people were asking for autographs. I don't do autographs. And it's like, and my dad says, "Are you R. Crumb?" And he says, "Yeah." And without looking up, he never looked up or made eye contact. And then my dad said, "This is my son Alex, and I raised him with your work." And Crumb said, "Poor kid," because I was Jasper, I was like 12, 13, 14 years old, and my dad is showing me, these comics that were like had, like
Mr. Natural.
Mr.
Uh,
Natural and
Fritz the
Fluffy
Cat.
Foods and Fritz the
Um,
Cat and just
Angel Food McSpade.
Angel Food and is extremely politically incorrect stuff that would just like, I mean, he did the cover for the, cheap, was it Cheap Tricks or whatever by,
Rose, wasn't it?
what is it, Cheap something?
I think it was Big Brother and the
Cheap,
Holding
cheap
Company with Janis
thrills.
Joplin
Cheap
singing.
thrills, right. But
Yeah.
Janis Joplin, another one of his friends growing up, and he's still a good friend, is as the gal who co-founded Joy of Cooking, um, and I keep forgetting her name, Terry. Was it Terry Garthwaite? Terry Garthwaite, who opened up for Janis
Oh,
Joplin
wow.
and
Okay.
Allen Ginsberg. So my dad and my mom went to school in Palo Alto with people like Joan Baez and Grace Slick. So we were kind of counterculture. And then
Mhm.
I got into comics artists uh, like Bruce Jones, like
Wow.
you
Spain
know,
Rodriguez, S. Clay Wilson,
I have a signed Spain.
Williams.
I have a
Wow.
signed Big Bitch. Okay, I have a signed Big Bitch, and I have but I'm Corbin is my man.
Hmm.
Richard Corbin. So I'm going to read because I just have it here. Okay. So our guest today, okay, I'm Alex S. Johnson. I haven't introduced myself, but anyway, I'm Alex S. Johnson. I'm AKA hello, AKA a small bear, and I'm an author, editor, journalist, and publisher. And some of the people that I publish include the likes of Billy Martin, Poppy Z. Bright, John Shirley, Caitlin R. Kiernan, Ellen Mabey, Ron Whitehead. It was the two-time Nobel Prize for Literature nominee. Um, and I don't and Jarbo from Swans, David J. Haskins from Bauhaus and Love and Rockets, and Graham Masterton, John Pelisano, and I don't really have time for. We published also Byron Roberts from the symphonic black metal band Bal Sagoth,
Wow.
and Tim Dry. And we co-published books with Fear Magazine
Hmm.
because Dean M. Drinkle is one of our guys. And so without further ado, our special guest today, I'm delighted we've been mates for years, or for yonks, as you say, in Blighty. Well, by the way, is that England or is that
Or the whole of the UK.
yeah,
That's a Good question. I don't know. It's a phrase that English people are more likely to use, though
Right.
it's obviously it's quite an outdated phrase now. None of my kids, so I don't think any millennials,
Okay.
Gen Zers would use it. But yeah, I definitely is the whole of England.
Right.
But I
Well,
like to think of myself.
I learned it from my mate Jason J. Slater, who worked
Mhm.
for like Fab Press, and this is something I was involved in. The
Whoa,
the David Warbeck book, right?
yeah.
So it's like to Alex, thanks for coming to Blighty, me son, J boy. He's a lad. The man is a lad. He's not. He's just don't leave him alone with your nubile teenage daughters. I'm just going to tell you right there and then and there. You know, well, I mean, he's reformed, I think, probably. Of course. I mean, I'm just jesting. Uh, Jason Jasper Bar Jason Voorhees. Jasper Jasper
Just before he's just before.
Jasper Voorhees is an award-winning horror author recognized for his shocking novels and engaging storytelling. He is also a novelist, children's author, and scriptwriter with works translated into 9 languages and utilized in UK schools to improve literacy, which is something I'm very much about. Jasper Bark has authored 4 cult novels. It says that right there on the
I
five.
don't know that's quite old now. It's
Oh,
10 novels now.
no, it's 10 novels. So
Uh-huh.
where are they? Okay. So he's written 12 children's books, hundreds of comics and graphic novels, received the This Is Horror Award for his anthology Dead Air. It's been nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, British Fantasy Award. He's won a Splatterpunk Award and a This Is Horror Award. And his career trajectory is he's been a film and music journalist, transitioned into writing novels, wrote work for higher fiction, including film and TV tie-in novels, comics based on cartoons, and online gaming scripts. His wife encouraged him to find his authentic voice, leading him to horror writing. Oh dear. The authentic voice, which he describes as hideous, dark, and twisted, has brought him significant recognition. His collaboration with Crystal Lake Publishing led to the creation of Bark Bites Horror, and I really want to get into that. His background includes a stint in repertory theater where he met his wife Veronica. His theater career ended when he was banned from working in the Northwest after turning a bonfire night celebration into a political protest. Interesting. He then moved to London, worked as a stand-up comedian and performance poet, which led to his appearance on late night TV and hosting the Erotic Oscars. Did I read that correctly? Erotic Oscars.
Yep.
He is the son of two river gypsies. Okay, this guy can credit. I mean, two river gypsies who settled in the northwest of England, has 2 Japanese half-brothers he has never met, born from his father's marriage to a Yakuza boss's daughter during his time in Japan after the Korean War. His father, a warrant officer who engaged in black ops and wet works, developed PTSD and went AWOL in Japan. Poor guy. He humorously recounts an encounter with Rupert Murdoch at a wedding reception where he accidentally bumped into him and was met with a glassy-eyed sneer. Another celebrity encounter that left him starstruck was with Julie Andrews. Wow. During a press junket for the second Shrek movie, Bark's work often delves into forbidden knowledge and forgotten beliefs, particularly with his ongoing Heresy series story cycle, which draws inspiration from ancient Mesopotamian beliefs. He's also incorporated Scottish folklore, such as tales of the Will-o'-the-Wisp and Tina, I can't pronounce that, Tina Bjork, Bjork, Tina Bjork. I have Scots ancestry, as well as modern urban legends like alien big cats into his stories like Quiet Places. His graphic novel, Parassassination, is described as a time-traveling political thriller with bizarre characters. And he also publishes, this may be old information, a free monthly webcomic called Fear Fix, which pays homage to 1970s black and white comic magazines and 1950s EC comics, which are, for me, it's the gold standard was the EC horror, and my mate Mimi Pond is all about that. I mean, one of her big inspirations was Harvey. Harvey Kurtzman, who was also worked with Crumb, right?
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to the show, sir. This
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
is brilliant. So, I want to straight. I want to get to into the whole series that you've done for Crystal Lake, um, um, for Joe Meinhardt, and this was a series of books. Now, I believe I haven't actually read them, but I'm going to acquire them, and I would, yeah, I would shoot, I would love to have. Is there any way we could like you could sign them and I could pay shipping and handling and all that stuff? Because
Oh, hell yeah.
yeah, okay, that would be amazing. And so, one of my second published short story, a horror short story, was
Mhm.
actually it's called Pen and Incubus, and it was published
Name.
in Blood. Thank you, and it was published in Blood Songs magazine. Initially,
Right.
initially it was sold to the Blood Songs when it was under Steve Proposh in Australia, right? And then it
Mm.
migrated to the United States, and it was run by Implosion Publications under the editor was David G. Barnett of the late great,
Right.
Necro Publications, right?
Yeah.
Which and they also put out, people like Lucy Taylor, and I arranged for that, and Poppy Z. Bright, Ramsey Campbell, all the people who are, you know, part of that kind of horror like and splatterpunk, first wave splatterpunk, I would say
Yeah.
like Lee and they put out this one, particularly Blood Songs, the sex issue featuring Poppy Z. Bright, Lydia Lunch, and Edward Lee, right?
Hmm.
And this story called Pen and Incubus was actually inspired by Too Much Coffee Man.
Oh, by Shannon Wheeler.
Yes, by Too Much, an image on the cover of Too Much Coffee. See, you're the perfect guy to talk to. On the cover of the Too Much Coffee Man series, which I actually acquired when I was visiting J-Boy in London, where I also interviewed Caroline Munro.
Wow.
He hooked me up with, and she gave me a little peck on the cheek, and I'll never forget. I got
Have
to
you touched your cheek since?
No, I mean, I got to, sit for an hour at a Baker Street tea shop with Caroline Munro, screen goddess.
Hmm.
And this story was there was a couple of people who really influenced it. One, Richard Corbin,
Hmm.
Dory Sita, the late great Dory Sita, right?
Yeah, who was in women's comics.
Exactly. And it was part of
Famously had a gap in her teeth, and used to do comic strips about her very flea-ridden dog.
Yes, and fucking her dog. Well, the rumors. I'm sorry. Yeah, the rumors. She easy for me to say, protested a little too much,
Reminiscence. All right, okay. Well,
right?
I
And so I have a really strong affinity. I've also in my book, The Doom Hippies, I
Mhm.
actually have a flash fiction called Death by Metafiction, which is also about a woman who becomes a character in a graphic novel,
Wow, okay.
Doom Hippies, and that was my design. I put this together, and it's gotten like a lot of a lot of good press, a lot of good ink. I'm not sure if Shirley has seen that one yet, but anyway, so I'm really fascinated by your series that you did for Meinhardt and this they're about horror comics. So could you kind of tell me how you got the inspiration for those books and how many of them are there going to be more?
It's a trilogy.
Okay.
I actually have them. I can hold them up. So that's Draw You In Volume One,
Yes.
collector's item. Draw You In Volume Two, which is Secret Origins, and Draw You In Volume Three, which is Behind the Mask. Um,
Uh,
they're all. Um, it's a a paranormal conspiracy thriller set against the backdrop of the history of horror comics from
Fascinating.
the 1950s. You mentioned EC horror comics all the way through to the present day. And we're currently undergoing a bit of a renaissance in horror comics. It's also a road trip across the entire United States, and it's delving into the secret history of the United States and, in fact, the secrets of the cosmos itself. When you reach the third and final book in the trilogy, the secrets of the entire universe will be yours. And if you missed any, I would suggest you go back and reread them all from scratch.
So,
Uh,
so without actually having read this book, I'm picking up a lot of overtones. Now, some of my favorite all-time, well, I want to, Monty Python is huge, is part of my DNA. Douglas Adams,
mhm.
and Robert Anton Wilson, I just get the feeling that these are also part of the mix for you as well.
Certainly Robert Anton Wilson, and
Yeah.
probably to a degree Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco.
Yeah.
Robert Anton Wilson and what was his Robert Shea, who was his collaborator on the Illuminatus trilogy,
Right.
was huge in the 70s. That definitely feeds into it.
Mhm.
Yes, it begins. It's also over three books. When you read horror comics, one of the great things about a lot of horror comics, particularly the EC horror comics you mentioned and the Warren comics,
Yeah.
is that they are anthologies. They
Right.
contain lots of stories. And so over the course of reading one comic, you can get lots of different genres or
Yeah.
subgenres of horror within it. And so I wanted to write a series of novels that actually contained many different subgenres, from psychological horror to extreme horror, from folk horror to quiet horror,
Yeah.
and from kind of monster horror
Yeah.
all the way through to cosmic horror. So it kind of runs the gamut. So it starts in a very kind of quiet Twilight Zone-ish way when the main protagonist is a middle-aged cartoonist who 10 years ago was absolutely the peak of her career, was
Right.
working for all the top publishers.
Right.
Now, as happens with many people, you have your kind of your 15 minutes of fame, your time in the sun, and
Right.
then the phone stops ringing, you stop being trendy, and you don't get as much work. And now she's working for all the top indies. She's at a Comic Con, and her old editor, a very influential, powerful man in the comics industry, turns up and invites her to an after-hours party,
Right.
which is the place where all the work gets basically given out.
Right.
Um, Conventions is where all the networking takes place. She turns up at this particular party only to find out that her name's not on the guest list as was promised. And in fact, absolutely nobody um, remembers this editor who she's worked with for years and years and years. He's actually a friend. She's known him for a couple of decades, and nobody seems to remember him. She goes back to the con. She starts talking to people about this guy, and she has absolutely no proof at all that he ever existed. Not only was she humiliated at the party, but it seems like he's pulled this completely strange hoax on her where he's got everybody at the convention to pretend he's never existed.
Oh my.
Uh, and she goes in search of him. She tries to track him down. She files a missing persons report for him. She even goes to visit his mother, whom she'd met many, many years ago. And even his mother tells her that she's never had a son. It's as if he's disappeared off the face of the planet. And just as it gets to the point where the police are considering filing charges for filing a misleading missing persons report, she's contacted by an FBI agent who says, I have actually been for years working on a case that's exactly the same as yours. A person I was tracking down disappeared so completely, they seem to be completely erased from existence. And the two things that connects the case are a forgotten comics genius called R.L. Carver, whose work was so brilliant starting in the 1950s that actually he became too good for the horror comics industry and he found himself marginalized, not just because he was African American, but because he was too talented to work in comics.
Right.
They begin to track down and find out what happened to this missing genius that only a tiny cognoscenti of comics fans know about, and who love his work that we have existing.
Yeah.
Uh, and as they track him down, they also begin to uncover the secret history of horror comics and his link to the secret history of the United States. And the mystery goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper as they continue. And they also discover that there's a long lost, forgotten, legendary comic that's supposed to be cursed that he created several times, called Tales That Draw You In. And every time that it was picked up by a publisher and was about to be printed, this original proto-graphic novel, absolute disaster struck the publishers. Either their printing press was burned down or they were mugged by gangs of bikers. But whatever happened, this legend built up around the fact that this missing graphic novel, Tales That Draw You In, is somehow cursed.
That
And
is
that's
incredible.
the basic premise.
And also as as you were telling me this, I was thinking about a couple of things that a couple of authors and works of the there is just as there's kind of an Indian horror subgenre, there's also a comics horror um subgenre of horror. I mean of writing fiction about horror comics. And what first comes to mind is Billy Martin's absolutely brilliant drawing Blood,
Blah.
right?
Oh,
It's a
fantastic.
classic, right? Classic.
Absolutely, totally adore. And I wish I wish I thought of that title. And Draw
Right?
You In is, in fact, actually something of an homage to that title.
Well, yeah, I mean, who doesn't love, Billy Martin and have to be a cretinous goon to not recognize that he has to horror sort of like graces horror by writing in that genre. But actually,
Ah,
I think, it's just my opinion, but that his foodie novels, such as
started with
Soul
liquor.
Kitchen, right, Liquor, those are really incredible. I mean, they're very witty, they're
Yeah.
very frothy and light, and more sort of like, Hunter S. Thompson meets Truman Capote.
Armistead Morpin.
And Armistead Maupin, exactly. And those characters are just, I just adore Billy. He knows that. And I wish he was in, you know, I mean, he has health problems, and his husband has, serious illness. So, squeezing warm squeezings for Billy. And also I was thinking another one of my favorites, horror novels of all time, The Bridge by Skip and Spector, which
Superb
draws
book.
upon, right, which draws upon the sort of slow, slow death eco funnies thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean the mutations in that book are just jaw-dropping, and I think it was either I think it may have been Craig described that whole their whole process was sort
Mhm.
of like, like they would put down they would jot down ideas first on index cards, right? And then like a gushy bit was I think that was Craig's phrase. Yeah, like, you know, some good, you know, well, I mean, eyeball trauma is for some reason, eyeball trauma is something that I've indulged in a bit.
Just
Right.
if I can hold up my thing, you'll notice here there is an inkwell with an
Okay.
eyeball bobbing in it,
Yeah.
and a hand holding a speedball dip pen about to dip in it, which is actually an homage to there are several famous covers, including one by Bernard Bailey, showing an eyeball with a flaming red hot poke about to go into it. And there's a great piece from a strip by Jack Cole, who invented Plastic Man, creative the Creative Plastic Man. He also did this famous strip called Morphine and Me, and there's a wonderful. It was used during the Kafalva hearings, and it was picked up by Frederick Wortham in his book Seduction of
Oh my
Innocence,
God.
where a woman has her eyeball like held open and a syringe attacks it. So their cover was as close as we could get without Amazon actually banning the book, to actually playing into that injured eyeball or injury to eyeball trauma, that
Yes.
is a motif starting in the 1950s and
And
going to the present day.
the Stephen Biro, who did the American Guinea Pig series, also did an homage to that with one of his
Oh,
films.
wow, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's now I know where it came from. And also speaking of like horror comics, and this is my series of, they're called Fucked Up Fairy Tales that I created with in collaboration with Bertie Walker. We also did a book called or actually Fucked Up Shit initially, and that led to an entire series of collaborations with other, very well-known, bizarro and horror authors, including Betty Rocksteady and Garrett Cook and
Hmm.
Reed Hughes, right? And so this was the second volume. This is my character, Princess Cherry Pop. Well, I think you'll recognize the illustrator.
Oh, is that not Jonan Vasquez?
No, it's just think of, well, we were talking about earlier about The Simpsons.
So is that Mimi who's done that?
No, it's actually somebody else who's associated with The Simpsons. Doop 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 doop.
It's not Matt Grayling.
No, it is two-time Academy Award
Okay.
nominee Bill Plimpton.
Ah, right. I don't recognize his work, but that's a superb cover.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and he also blurbed the entire series. Witty and clever.
Wow, superb of him.
Yeah, it was really nice. He's a really nice guy, and just having my character illustrated by an Academy Award nominee is just, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, totally.
so wow, I'm so excited about this series because, reading, I was really one example of sort of how, being mates with somebody and then kind of talking to them, interviewing them, and then that leads to just dates other stuff. Like I did this interview with Lucy Taylor for Blood Songs, which is which is an issue that also contained an interview with Clive Barker.
Wow, okay.
And it was sort of like it was called like Lucy Taylor and Alexis Johnson talk about the three essentials of life: sex, death, and wrestling, so and she was talking about her, she's also in the book. She's generously given me permission to republish this original story called Extrema Files, which was originally published in my book, Axis of Evil Heavy Metal Horror Anthology,
Wow, okay.
right? And that was an original story, and she's given me permission to republish it in the Clive Barker book because she's also a huge Clive Barker fan. We talked about Clive in that interview, and then she said that she sort of has this kind of feeling that that she was talking about her addiction to high risk sex, and she's been very forthcoming about that, and also how she always had this idea about writing a story about somebody who had a who hired somebody to murder them because it was such a turn on. And so I wound up, that idea percolated in my subconscious. And then years later, I wrote this story, which was published in the Noir Erotica series that was edited by Thomas S. Roche. And it was called Hollywood Black. And that series, I mean, it had everybody, right? It had Daniel Willis, Lydia Lunch, Caitlin, John Shirley, Poppy, you know, whatever. I mean, it's just ridiculous, like the people who came out of that series. And so I was very fortunate to have a couple of different connections with Lydia Lunch, is
Wow. Okay.
right. So anyway, that was that story. So as you're describing your horror comics related series that you did for Crystal Lake, now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have to continue I want to write a sequel to Pen and Incubus now. I really need to do that. And I need to put it out again because it hasn't been published since 1998.
Wow. Okay. You
So
must.
what? Yes, it's an absolute must. And
Definitely is.
also I wanted because you're very, you would like to write a story for my Clive Barker book. And
Hmm.
Clive, your suffering will be cuddly even in heck. So I was wondering if you had played around with any ideas.
I haven't yet. I'm still thinking on it.
That's, that's
But
good.
yeah, there's a lot of crossover between the type of things I write and the sort of things that Clive has written. Obviously, a seminal influence on my
Right.
work. So
Yeah.
it would be nice to pay homage to that and pay him something back.
Right. Can we just get into some talking about some Clive? Because
Yeah, 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 definitely.
I just so what was your first encounter with his work? I mean, I talked a little bit about Books of Blood, right? Yeah.
It was the very first edition and the very first volume of the Books of Blood, Volume One.
Right.
And obviously, the very first thing I read by him was the opening story about the psychic who is faking all of the psychic phenomena,
Mm.
who stirs up and annoys the ghosts of the dead. So they decide to start writing their stories on his skin and turn him into a living book of blood. That was the first that was the intro story that I read, and obviously, and the story that had the most effect on me in that particular anthology. I mean, there's the fantastic Meat Train. Well, hang on, no, there's the Midnight Meat Train.
Yeah.
There's a superb one. There was Pig Blood Blues, which is also a very, very strange story, but the one that really hit home and knocked me for six. As a 12-year-old kid, was In the Hills, the Cities. I'd never read anything quite like that. Quite so visionary and quite so amazing.
Yeah. Yes. And yeah, I mean, and also like I always, well, I mean, I'm a creative, I'm also an artist and a comics artist and I would love to illustrate one of your stories. And this is one example of some of my work.
Wow, okay.
So anyway, maybe it's shite, but I don't know. I still like, I get so excited about things, how stories, other authors, will kind of gestate in my subconscious and I'll come up with something. So for years, one of my publishers in a author chat used the phrase puke graveyard. That was about a decade ago. And I filed it away first, I was like, I have to write a story called Puke Graveyard that does justice to that because she was very ill. She had the flu or something. It was like puke graveyard. And I was just like, this is very surreal, but also, resonant and with my splatter punk bizarro sensibilities. And so last year I wrote a story called Puke Graveyard, which is an homage to two things. It was one, The Return of the Living Dead,
Mhm.
which
Okay.
I have a good friend named Leslie Spivey, who's also known as Elvorian von Spivey, who was the guitarist for um, uh, Penis Flytrap. So death rock supergroup that had, Dinah Cancer from 45 Grave as their vocalist. And I also interviewed Mary, aka Dinah Cancer. So they're very famously Party Time, as on the soundtrack to that film. And so the fact that it was like a William S. Burroughs inspiration for Clive Barker, and then I took that and I had these puking zombies, radioactive puking zombies who kind of, they puke up sort of um, simulacra of themselves, and then
Hmm.
and then those puke zombies consume other flesh zombies, and then it's a sort of like a worm Ouroboros of zombie puke zombie, kind of a chain of it's hideous and depraved. One of my favorite blurbs of all time, I think
Hmm.
you'll appreciate this. Lucy Taylor, the undisputed queen of erotic horror, she wrote
Hmm.
about my collection, Wicked Candy. She said, bizarro horror laced with black humor. Wicked Candy is um, shocking, perverse, and at times funny as hell. Right. And so, I mean, and then, I asked her, I was like, Lucy, I love you so much. Thank you so much. I asked her to blur another one of my collections, which is called Shatter Girl. She got within like 2 pages and she was like, Alex, I'm sorry, this is a bit too intense for me. So when I'm too hardcore for Lucy Taylor, but anyway, I'm
You're
not
either doing something very, very right or very, very
very
wrong.
wrong in all the right ways, of course. So you've had such an interesting career as you've been a journalist, a film and music journalist. What can you tell me about some of those? What are some of the most standout anecdotes you can tell from that era of your professional life?
Um, I um I once had I don't know if there was a movie called Buena Vista Social Club.
Mhm.
It's done by Wim Wenders. I went to interview the cast of that, the musicians,
Right.
Farah, and a whole bunch of the other musicians in a hotel suite. And I
Yeah.
came there from a tryst in which I'd actually left my underwear behind. And I went to interview them. And in the middle of the interviewing Omar Portuendo, who is like the Cuban Shirley Bassey, was a towering figure in song. Suddenly, the translator, because they're all speaking in, I believe it's Portuguese that they
Portuguese,
speak.
yeah.
Um, and
Portugal.
um, and I was speaking in English, and I didn't speak, but Portuguese, and they didn't speak English, so it was by way of a of an interpreter who was a very bluff, very broad, no nonsense middle-aged woman. She suddenly bursts out laughing, and I say, "What's the problem?" And she says, "Omara wants to know when you're going to take your trousers off." And I said, uh, didn't really know what to say to that. And then Amara said something, and she said, "Yeah, in her country, it's when two people like each other, it's a big tradition to exchange gifts, and you've got green trousers on, so she'd like your trousers." And I said, I wasn't quite sure how to bluff my way around this. And there's all these very nice, sweet, chintzy PR girls not quite sure what to do. And Amara Portuendo got out of her seat
Right.
and began unbuckling my belt,
Ooh.
undid my trousers and my fly, and pulled my trousers
Oh
off.
no.
I wasn't wearing any underwear, so I was trying to keep my hands over my meat and two veg, as we would say here in the UK.
What
Um,
what what was
well,
what was the disposition of your throbbing gristle?
it was actually it was backing way up. It was going to go and hide.
Okay.
I wasn't quite used to being out displaying this way, and you can imagine that suddenly these PR ladies are absolutely they don't know where to put themselves. If you imagine sort of Joanna Lumley and Jennifer Saunders and absolutely fabulous, this was sort of people it was,
I
and
love
there's
that
and was
show. One of my favorite shows.
and the lady who was translating thought this was absolutely hysterically funny, so she was rolling around laughing. And then I'm sort of sitting on this couch in this really posh hotel suite in downtown Mayfair, and Amara was refusing to give me back my trousers. Uh, So that interview went kind of like rather strangely. And that evening, actually, in a taxi cab on the way to a club called China White, I interviewed Danny Dyer, the British very courtly geezer, now a movie star. That was for his first movie, Human Traffic, along with Justin Kerrigan, the director. And I must admit, I was able to sit there and say, okay, the last interview I did about a few hours ago, I said the lady took my trousers off. So talk that, geezer. Oh, I know, I'll do my best.
Th-
So
Well,
that's probably the most memorable thing that ever happened to me during an interview.
so there are a couple of things. First, China White is the name of a form of heroin.
It is. And they named a nightclub after it in the late 90s in the UK in London.
It
It
is
was the swanky place to go.
it is also the title of a contribution to my anthology. Try to find it here without having Henry Rollins fall in my head. Um,
No
shoot.
one wants Henry Rawlins to fall on their head.
Well, you
Not even Mrs. Rawlins.
this Mrs. Rollins, he's been very. Oh dear. You know who is haunting me? Lemmy has been haunting me. I just
Pinhead is just falling in your lap. He has such sights to show you. It was like a story about Amada Portuenda. We thought, I'm not going to be overdone by this limey bastard here. I'm going to take off Alex's trousers.
well, so I will be like thrusting my arm up like the lady in the lake and showing you this thing while I hunt for
The
um
junk merchants.
the junk merchants. Yeah. This
A
can
tribute to Winnie Mess Burrows.
this is a anthology which will fry your brain when you hear who's in it. And I'm very OCD about things like cute mini pinhead, being tossed off my shelf. But this is not very professional of me, having OCD. Anyway, so this book,
That's no problem.
so it's got David J. Haskins from Bauhaus in it. It's got Carrie Lee Crum, who founded the band The Runaways, an
Right.
original piece by Carrie Lee Crum, who hasn't
Wow.
who hasn't published anything since the days of the Runaways. It's got a piece by my mate Anna Taborska, who just won the Bram Stoker Award last year.
She is a fabulous, fabulous writer and a
Right.
lovely human being as well.
She is probably the nicest person that I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and we're doing this animal rights anthology called A Collective Paw,
Hmm.
and for she sent me about 5 emails, you know, with contributions and apologizing to me that she couldn't write more original stuff for me. And I'm like, because she's running the Rain Dance Festival, film festival right now. And I was like, Anna, you're just like one of the nicest people ever. Like, know, please, no, we have sufficient Anna Taborska material, including original work. So I love you so much. Uh, I hope that somebody gives her a lot of money so she had to quit writing so she could run the film festival. So which is a
Yeah,
absolute tragedy.
it is because she's such a brilliant author.
She is. Um, so. So we have a piece by Jarbo from Swans. Nicole H. Six, who is an actress. She's the one who wrote China White, and she is an actress, film director, dark fiction writer, poet, animal rights activist, also the daughter of Nikki Six from Motley Crue. So, and
Oh, yeah.
she is an incredible human being. So she's the one who wrote China White. Now, the reason I brought this up is because there was another little kind of interesting anecdote that has to do with David J. Haskins. So when Nico, who was also a friend of Carrie, Chrome, and when Nico was sitting in with Bauhaus, and she was so high that they had to like prop her up. So there's this photos you can find on Google Images of like Peter Murphy, and he's got Nico, and he's gonna like that,
Wow.
right? This is incredible how many connections there are between all these people. And we also have David J on board for um, I want to invite you into everything, but for the our David Bowie tribute anthology, we also have Hannah Breshard, who's the space cadet, right? And who was in famously the Cracked Actor film. And
Mhm.
also, we have Caitlin R. Kiernan is in there, and I did an extensive interview with Tony Zanetta, who was the president of Main Man Entertainment, and who kind of crafted the Ziggy Stardust persona. And he was also an actor in the film. I mean, I'm sorry, he was an actor in Andy Warhol's Pork. He played Andy Warhol, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And he's a really, really, really nice guy. So, I know you're busy doing your own Jasper Bark stuff, and I would never, want to detract any time away from that. But, we have so many interesting anthologies, and I particularly if you have anything at all whatsoever to do with animals for a collective paw that we could have a reprint from you, that would be just incredible because this is for animal rights and it's Nicole H. her cause, and she's a
Yeah.
beautiful person. So, um,
I think I may have something that might work actually.
that would be beautiful.
I might.
I would be thrilled. And we have Poppy, we have Caitlin, we have Lauren Soares, gave us some,
Yeah.
Anna Taborska gave us some stuff. And so let me see, because I want to get there's so much. Um, so tell me about Fear Fix.
Well, that's something of a an aborted venture.
Oh,
That was an online web comic that I had planned with Michael David Wilson of This Is Horror.
yeah.
Uh, but that's no longer extant. And that was a collection of a lot of short stories I'd had published in various horror comics that repackaging we were repackaging and putting out on the net, but it's no longer up. So
Okay,
the name Fearfix is still knocking about and something I'll do, hopefully something with at some point in the future when I get a spare moment.
okay, great. So I was fascinated with this little reference to your theater career um ending when you were banned from working in the Northwest after turning a bonfire night celebration into a political protest. Can you tell me about that?
Bonfire Night is a very British celebration. It's kind of like a cross between the 4th of July and Halloween.
Mhm.
When I was growing up as a small child in the UK, we didn't really celebrate Halloween at all. It was just known as Mischief Night. There was no knocking on anyone's door and asking for candy. If you did, you just get punched in the face where I grew up in the north of England. So it was very rough. So we went straight to the tricks. But just after Halloween, about 5 days after, on November the 5th, the British routinely celebrate the fact or commiserate the fact that the Houses of Parliament weren't blown up under King James in 1600 and something, the very early 17th century. So they build giant bonfires and they build an effigy of Guy Fawkes called a guy. And they set off fireworks and they eat disgusting candy called bonfire toffee, which is like burnt caramel, which seriously is hard enough to take out your teeth. You can chip diamonds with it. And rather than having like big carved pumpkins, they used to carve what we would call mangelwurzels, which were like very big turnips, and you'd carve a turnip out with the same sort of face, and you put a lantern inside that. And way back in 1990. I was part of a theatre arts cooperative called 3 Point Turn. We were working in the town of Carlisle, and we were booked to do put on the local bonfire celebrations. And there we decided to work with the 18 to 25 unemployed of the area, who were
Yeah.
basically a lot of the people that we were friendly with because we were about that same age ourselves. I was only 20 years old. Why on earth they handed me like a multi-thousand pound budget, I don't know, but I was very good at BSing people. Um, so myself and my colleagues got all this money. We put together the UK's first ever all-female, actually all gay pyrotechnic team, and we built instead of a bonfire, we built a giant effigy of the local seat of office, which was called the Civic Centre, which was like the town hall, uh,
Might you say that
directly over the
flaming?
road. A big
Sorry,
Harry from the
sorry,
Civic.
I had to do that. So might you say that they were flaming?
Yeah, and well, and then we built giant puppets on the back of cars that had like aerial races. The a bunch of the people we worked with got together and formed like a 12-piece thrash band, and we even had a local street band, and we actually got all this past the local council, and they underwrote all of this, and then on the day, a local councillor, a conservative council. We have a conservative party. It's kind of similar to your Republican Party.
Right,
This was a very left-wing council at the time, so he was one of two or three conservatives. The rest were all Labour, which is
right.
kind of like your Democrats, but used to be more left wing. Now it's kind of like the same. They're just, relatively centre right.
Yeah,
But this council was leftish or semi progressive.
right,
This chap, Councillor Brian Porter, caused a huge stir because he wanted a bit of publicity in the press, saying this was absolutely terrible and what were these evil long-haired layabouts doing on this. But no, we had 10,000 people, which is just about two-thirds of the population turn out to see it and think it was an amazing night. It was considered to be a huge success. But this council started to stir up a scandal, and we were told by the local council, just say at the last minute, all these people came in and spoilt it, and you didn't know anything was going on, and we'll just wait till it blows over. And because I was young and idealistic at that point, I refused to say that. So when the local press and the TV and the radio, all of whom I'd worked with by that point as a performer and a writer,
sure,
as part of this theatre arts cooperative, I refused to back down and say this. And I just said this was like something we're really, really proud of. This has
sure.
never happened before here in the
Right.
city. This was a huge success.
Yeah.
And it became a huge scandal. I had people stopping me in the street wanting to punch me and people shaking me by the hand saying this is the best
What?
thing that's ever happened in the city.
Wow.
Um, about 2 years before, I'd been technically homeless. I'd been sofa surfing and a bit of a bum. And I got to the point whereby I had my own apartment. We had a business, we had business premises, we had lots of assets. And we had full funding from the county, the local regional arts board,
Mhm.
and the city itself. And all of that was taken away from us. We were shut down. And even though the council should have underwritten all the debts and paid for it all, they refused to do that. So I'd gone from being homeless to being uh, quite successful by the age of 20 as part of a theatre arts cooperative
Right.
to basically having to sell everything we had to pay off this debt. And so we were shut down. They didn't allow us to work in any venue anywhere at all in the northwest of England. So we took to the streets and we used to put on little mini street festivals, mainly to raise the money, not just to kind of feed ourselves while we were sleeping on other people's floors, but
Right.
also to pay off this ridiculous debt. And slowly but surely, this big street theatre festival we took touring around the region kind of dwindled to myself and one other guy, a long-term friend, Mr. David Baxter, hitching from town to town doing bits of street theatre.
Wow.
Um, 20 bucks per performance while we paid down the last of our debt.
That's brilliant.
One minute I was being given the keys to the city on a big like golden cushion. The next minute I was tarred and feathered and ridden to the city limits.
That is
Uh,
incredible. That's an incredible story. Did you ever, well, and maybe this was a bit earlier, but it makes me think of, like cooperatives like Crass and Discharge and the sort of like crust core guys or
We were kind of we were somewhat influenced by that type
yeah,
of thing,
Penny
but also
Franco. Yeah,
by cooperatives like the Living Theatre, which
yes,
was very, very
exactly.
big in your part of the world,
Sure.
uh, and theatre practitioners like Jerzy Grotowski and also Antonin Artaud. And over here, there were lots of cooperatives like Red Shift and Red Ladder. And there'd been a big flowering of that in the 70s and 80s, and
Yes,
it died down for the 90s, and we were
my
trying to
God.
resurrect it a little
I mean,
bit.
Anson and Artaud is one of my foundational influences. When I read, I think,
Theatre is double.
yeah, I think, yeah, I think it was because I read, we're going back to, Danny Sugarman again, because Danny Sugarman was a friend of Nico, who was a friend of,
Jim Morrison.
Carrie, Carrie Crum, who, and also dated Jim Morrison, right? So there's all these, and was with, the Velvet Underground. I mean, there's all these connections, right? But I completely derailed myself. I was so enthusiastic about, oh yes, no one here gets out alive, right? Nine to five, 9 to 5, working 9 to 5. What a way! But Danny Sugarman wrote, no one here gets out alive, and then when I read that. I think I found out about Antonin Artaud, and I was like, holy shit, who's Antonin Artaud? So I started to read, particularly the theater in its double, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then later, when I in the 80s, when I got into Bauhaus, that holy shit, they did a whole song, called literally Antonin Artaud on Burning from the Inside. And now I get to work with David J. Haskins. So it's just like an
Superb is that?
incredible, full circle, right? So yes, Antonin Artaud. And you mentioned puppets. So like, which was part of his, right, puppets.
Mhm.
And what was it about Artaud that you found attractive?
I think it's one, it's the poetry of his words. A man who described the work, viewing the work of Van Gogh as that moment when the pupil becomes liquid and bleeds into the void. You think that's an intense piece of imagery. And the fact that he wanted to do with more with theatre and more with art in its totality
Right,
um, than had ever been done before. He wanted transformational experiences that would change people for the
right,
rest of their lives. That theatre was not just a passive entertainment that whiled away a couple of hours and gave you a small amount of catharsis.
right,
It to be a near life or death experience, something that you suffered, but also ultimately transcended. And I think a lot of his theories and philosophies and ideas about the type of theatre you wanted to mount were probably more aspirational than they were realizable.
sure.
But it was a fantastic manifesto, the theatre in its double, to take inspiration from. And we were certainly very inspired by it
Right.
and certainly got into a lot of trouble because of it. But
What
wasn't the
I,
first or the last time that happened to me.
I do want to address the trouble aspect of that, but I also want to, give you one name, Alejandro Jodorowsky.
I love, absolutely love. I have actually written some major retrospectives of his work. And another artist I absolutely, utterly adore. I own all his films.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm filing these things away because eventually we're probably going to have to do a Jodorowsky tribute, right? So yeah, so okay, so you talked about getting in trouble for your Artodian shenanigans. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Um, well, and obviously there was there's the obscene bonfire fiasco,
Right.
as we call it. About 10 years later. I had a play at the Prime venue at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is one of the biggest international European festivals of theatre, art, and culture. I had a play called excuse the expletive, it was called Fuck the State in 5 Easy Lessons. And it was about a group of bedsit dwelling anarchists who come back off a big demonstration to discover that through a ridiculous series of circumstances, a female police officer has showed up at their squat and accidentally died. And in a drug-fueled state of paranoia, they first hide the body, thinking they're going to be blamed for death. And then, through a ridiculous series of circumstances, they dismember the body. And even though they're all complete vegans, they end up having to cook and eat it. And this caused huge outrage in the tabloid press. And we were actually nominated for a Fringe First, which is like the Oscars of the whole theatre world, but it was taken away from us. And at that particular time, while this play was on at the Prime venue at the Pleasance Theatre, I was doing a one-person show in a different theatre, and I was walking. When you play Edinburgh, you spend most of your time just plugging your show. When you're not on stage, you're handing out leaflets and trying to get people to come to
Yeah.
your show. My theatre cast would do this by putting on a huge piece of street theatre, all dressed as squat dwelling anarchists and handing out leaflets. And I would be walking up and down the Royal Mile, which is the main drag in Edinburgh, just handing out leaflets saying, "Please come and see me." And once I was walking past them, handing out leaflets, and they were kind of there playing music and jumping around and handing out loads of leaflets. And suddenly, a Black Mariah, which is an unmarked police van, pulled up in front of them, and a whole bunch of police officers got out, piled out the back of the van, and surrounded them. And they started, because they were quite young and idealistic, arguing with them. And the police officers picked them up off the street and put them into the back of the van and drove away with them. I'm standing there aghast, like not understanding what I'm seeing. This is an international theatre festival, and a whole bunch of police officers turned up and arrested my cast like we're in like Soviet Russia. I was a bit like, is this happening?
Wow.
They did let them go in time for the performance, but they were told that if you go and create a disturbance on the street again, not that there weren't hundreds of street theatre performers, I happen to add, that they would be arrested and charged. So, yeah, and we were denied the Fringe First, and in fact, actually, when a show's about to go on, they used to have people coming out and standing in the courtyard, and they would announce the house is now open for, and they'd say the name of the play, Man and Superman by George Bernard Shaw. In this particular part of the venue, they would come out and say the house is now open for the stage. They couldn't actually say the proper name of our show for fear of offending the blue rinsers and perhaps the old dowager widows who might have turned up and had a heart attack had they heard the name of this play. Um, Bizarrely, the next year I wrote a one-woman play for the singer and comedian Terry Neeson. And I think because they owed her a Fringe First, and I think they sort of thought I hadn't been allowed to have a Fringe First for
Yeah.
my play the next year, they kind of gave me like a pity Fringe First.
Right.
I did win a Fringe First, but not for a work that was particularly controversial.
Oh, that's congratulations. That's incredible. I had no idea. That's really nice. That's uh I was just thinking like well, I'm always because I'm kind of neurodivergent AF.
Mhm.
I never just have one idea. I have like 1,000 ideas, and they're sort of like butterflies, just like psychedelic butterflies explode
Mhm.
in my head. And so, where do I even begin? I was going to ask you about if the situationists played any kind of role in your kind of inspiration, because for me, they're huge.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I would definitely say they would. Obviously, I'm a person who has drawn to challenging societal conventions and norms.
Right.
Not necessarily cause a problem or to directly upset people, but because it's worthwhile challenging all the basic fundamental ideas on which we base our lives and base our society just to kind of check to see
Sure.
if they're worth reassessing. And sometimes there's an absolute direct and definite and very good reason why we have the societal norm, such
Right.
as we shouldn't murder people, or we shouldn't commit paedophilia. And
Right.
other times there are norms and taboos which perhaps we as a society perhaps have grown out of,
Sure.
such as oppressing particular minorities or one gender or another.
Yeah.
So it's always worth kind of stirring things up a little bit. So the situationists, again, I think they are a lot of people who ascribe to anarcho-syndicalist beliefs. It's something I think to aspire to. I don't know as human beings, particularly human beings who are raised in the very hierarchical dominator culture in which we are raised, a
Right.
kind of post-capitalist culture. If we could necessarily uh, um, transition simply and easily into a non-hierarchical, completely autonomous society of mutual and voluntary interaction, without a few stages in between. And not this is why many anarcho-syndicalists argued that we should go through socialism first and then communism. And by the time we've
Right.
got those all worked out, that the state will wither on the vine and we'll all have this wonderful anarchist utopia. I don't know if that's the case, but I do like the idea of human beings interacting out of the goodness of their own heart and societies in which there is as little hierarchy as possible and there is as much mutual respect and mutual understanding from individual to individual. So things like the situationists, again, it's aspirational.
Right.
They they dream of a world that I would like to see. Obviously, many people would say this is completely unrealizable and unachievable, and I can quite understand why they would say that.
Right.
At the same time, wouldn't it be nice to have that world?
Right. Well, I think this is where artists come in. You know, I had the good fortune of spending some time with Lemmy, Kilmister,
Mhm.
who was like one of my biggest heroes. And is superbly brilliant, very kind, compassionate, very polite British gentleman. The whole stage persona was completely, he believed in giving you a show, but he
Yeah,
was one of the kindest people I've ever met in my life, and so generous. And he was very famous for kind of his, kind of controversial adaptation of sort of the Nazi regalia and collecting the Hitler Jugend knives, But, and so when I was working for Metal Maniacs magazine, and the guy, Michael Goldblatt at the time, Mike G at the time he was the editor, and he had just come off a series of interviews with Lemmy where he was like, "So, are you a Nazi?" And finally, it was sort of for me, it was just a little bit too, you know, like a little bit of what we call virtue signaling now. I mean, I do get that, I mean, anti-Semitism is horrific, and I have many, Jewish friends. It's a terrible thing, but as Lemmy said, that he's the complete opposite. He said, well, and when I did interviewed him for Metal Hammer magazine in 1999, and he said, well, Alex, I'm poor Nazi me. I date a black girl. I date a black girl. Poor Nazi me, right? And so I think that Lemmy was, you know, is not really given enough credit for social justice, for his lyrics are extremely intelligent. If you really think, and this is what Rollins says as well, it's like killed by death. That's stupid. Well, Rollins always, says things in a way that you could be like, you cannot disagree with. Lemmy was the same way. He would just say, he would take, something that philosophers have wrestled with for centuries, and he says something pithy, like a pithy joke, and like, oh, Lemmy said it or Rollins said it, and that's all you need to know, right? You don't have to read Nietzsche because you've heard Rollins. These are right, and or Gene Simmons, but I don't know. Yeah, so Lemmy was the real Yoda, not Gene. But I don't have a point here, Jasper. What I want to say is that I think it's extremely important what you are doing. And I'm really impressed because a lot of writers, I've known a lot of writers in Splatterpunk. I mean, I knew the original Splat Pack,
Yeah, you did.
right? Um, Craig Spector was very kind to me, and so was Lucy Taylor and Billy Martin and Caitlin. And I've only met Clive a few times, not any. We're trying to get him on board. But
And David J. Scow as well.
David J. Scow, yeah, David J. Scow, I met him and well, what is really interesting because I was living in South Pasadena, California at the time. And I used to go to this place that was, it was a sort of this beat kind of beat coffee house. We would do readings and we'd have, it was really, really great coffee. And so when I was interviewing, Craig gave me an exclusive interview after he and Skip broke up. And
Mhm.
he found out that I was asking around about him, and he calls me up at midnight, like, one day, and he's like, "Yeah, is Alex Johnson." He's like, "Yeah, this is Craig Spector." I was like, "Holy shit!" I was like, uh, "Wow, I'm a huge fan of yours." And then he would go on and on. He would like call me every week, sometimes a couple of days, often, and he would just go on and on and on and on and on and on and on, about like he had me over to his apartment. We probably did about 8 hour or 9 hours of interviews,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And he even gave me advice when my marriage broke up. He gave me very, very Craig Spector type advice. It was like, Alex, you need to build a box. You know, build a box, get some, 2x4s, and then, hammer them together, make a box. You don't have to make it, you know, just it doesn't have to be, Frank Lloyd Wright, but it has to be solid. Make it good, basically. Because he's Russian. He's Russian, so he's like hardcore. He could be the character that, Viggo Mortensen plays in a history of, or that Cronenberg film, right?
Right.
Where it's like, he could be
Hey,
that guy.
marital advice was build a box. You can kind of see why that career as a marriage counselor didn't work out, can't you?
Well, it wasn't like what you're thinking. It wasn't like, to
I'm
like
just joking.
I, a simple plan. It was more like, although no, it was more like take everything, all the mementos of your marriage, put them in the box, and then what was it like? Bury the box? I don't know. It was just like he had these forceful, simple, monolithic
Yeah.
pieces of advice, which only Craig Spector would be able to give credibly. If anybody else gave them, you'd be like, build a box. It'd be it's Monty Python, right? Build a box. Um, yes, build a box. But why? And so God, I really derailed myself. Help me out here. So where were we? Yeah, so the Splatterpunks, right?
Yeah.
You won a Splatterpunk award. Tell me about that.
Well, that was as part of a collection called Beyond Reform that I did with Aaron Beauregard and John Athan. Um, and that was I was part of the original conversation with Roth, James White, and also Brian Keane, who set up the Splatterpunk Awards, and they kind of wanted something to rival the Stokers, but something that would recognize the work of the kind of slightly dirty, more blue collar end of horror writing that got down and got dirty and got gritty, because a lot of the awards would tend to celebrate the more literary elements of the horror genre, quite correctly, I think. But
Yeah,
they wanted an award that would perhaps recognize the kind of the lower end of the horror scale. Um, and I think it was the second time the awards were nominated. Beyond Reform, this we based Aaron, John, and I our work on a famous collection called Triage, which included Jack Ketchum, Richard Lehman, and Edward Lee, who were almost kind of like the three patron saints
yes,
of the pre-splatterpunk movement,
right.
effectively, and certainly the patron saints of the extreme horror movement. And our collection, it originally went up for best anthology. And then Brian decided at the last minute, he contacted Aaron and said, I think we should swap it around to and make it best collection. So we won a Splatterpunk Award. That was also the people who voted in the Splatterpunk Award were our peers. So it's one of those awards, a bit like the This Is Horror Award. They're not decided by a committee. You're actually voted on by your peers and your colleagues, which is an even cooler thing to get a pat on the back. So yeah, we all wrote three ridiculously disgusting, hideously horrible, but very twisted, quite visionary stories each, and they're contained in Beyond Reform, which is still out there from Aaron's press.
I need to get that. Also, not to toot my own horn or big note yourself, as they say in Australia, but just a quote, Alex S. Johnson is Bizarro, Brian Keene, 2017.
Fantastic!
Right?
What endorsement!
What an
Uh,
endorsement, right?
what
Yeah.
a towering figure in our genre as well, Mr. Keane is.
Mr. Keene, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's brilliant. You've also won a This Is Horror Award. You've been nominated for a Bram Stoker and a British Fantasy Award. Could you tell me about those projects that you were involved with?
Um, my work was just put up, went into the shortlist, and didn't quite get the award that time around.
Yeah,
My time. I think that was for the British Fantasy Award was for my third novel, Dawn Over Doomsday, which was put out by Abaddon Books, and I've completely forgotten the story that was up for the Bram Stoker Award. That was, I think it was one of my Crystal Lake books.
right,
Excuse me. But that wasn't my time.
right. It
Uh,
wasn't, yeah.
and no, and hopefully I have a lot of years left writing in me, and by the time I'm a grand old fart of horror writing, they'll wheel me out. Just they'll give another Pinty Award. Never
Right.
mind, your good stuff didn't get awarded, but here's a reward just for like not dying. Hope I'm age 99 and a toothless crone in a wheelchair saying the most inappropriate things and not caring.
We,
Under
uh,
with the time when my come online to the comely young uh, uh, men and women who turn up at these events will be, would you like to empty my colostomy bag? I'm a horror legend. I
yes.
think
Um,
it'll work. I'll be particularly successful, but anyway.
well, first of all, I just want to give a shout out to Anna Taborska, who finally got her Stoker after, last year after being nominated,
Yeah.
5 times. And this is the
Oh, you well deserved, definitely, and
best
brilliantly
horror
timed.
of the year,
Yeah.
you know,
Hmm.
volume 4. And just yesterday, I shipped off 4 of our anthologies to Ellen Datlow. So wish us luck, because I mean,
Fingers crossed.
you know, another one um, that I'm really proud of. This is called White on White, a literary tribute to Bauhaus. It is a forward by Billy Martin. It
Right.
can work by Caitlin R. Kiernan, John Shirley, Jeribo, Carrie Lee Crum founded the Runaways with Joan Jett. David J. Haskins founded Bauhaus and Love and Rockets, and Nicole Vasari, and Tara Van Flower, who's the co-leader of the band Lycia, which is, collaborated with Typo Negative, right? And they're the favorite band of Trent Reznor, according to Vice magazine, right? And
Fascinating.
and Ethan Maroulis, who was the the main guy in, bands like Black Tape for a Blue Girl and Spawn Ranch, where he wrote an original piece,
Fantastic.
right? Thank you so much. So this is I think these anthologies, if I do say so myself, are like the gold standard of, having literary and literal rock stars, right? You
Oh,
cannot
hell yeah.
beat that. This is what Graham Masterton said about the Junk Merchants, which a literary tribute to William S. Burroughs, the which is the one of the other ones that we put out. A fine tribute to the Burroughs legacy. The bill has been paid in full. That's Graham Master.
Oh, how superb.
Thank you. We have introduction by Poppy Z. Bright, forward
Oh,
by Graham Masterton, and the other one that we put out. I'm gonna dip into my box here. That's what she wanted. I'm sorry, I have a penchant for terrible puns. You know, Hand of Doom, a literary tribute to Black Sabbath, and this contains all original work. All
wow.
original work. That's John Shirley, Anna
And
Taborska,
John Palisano as well, I notice.
John Palisano, Christy Nogle, um, Garrett Cook, Mimi Williams, Paul M. Salmon. Right. And this is David Granoff, who's a good mate of Shirley's, and Lucifer Fulci from the band the death rock supergroup Penis Flytrap. Right. Who's also I think he was just on tour with Venom Incorporated, right? Anna was just a sweetheart. Or Lisa Kastner, Ai Zhang, and Michael H. Hansen, who you know, I, he's in everything, right? He's in everything that I put out, as is Ellen Mabey, and he's like a Riesling Award nominee. So, so this is really, I'm really, really proud of this, and it's all the
Yeah.
the proceeds go to help, like Children of the Night Incorporated to help, rescue sex trafficked children, and it was the favorite charity of Ronnie James Dio.
Mhm.
So, like, right, stand up and shout for, the right of children not to be sex trafficked, right? And it's sold into pornography. That is really one of the best causes I can think of.
Alex,
Yes,
can I just say it's gone 5:30 here,
yes.
which is and I have to
Okay.
head off now and go pick up my wife.
Yes. So, it's been fantastic,
It's been
Jasper.
a huge pleasure. Can I just once more plug the Draw You In trilogy?
Absolutely. And also,
I have a book coming out at the end of this month, again with Crystal Lake Publications. It's the
okay.
seventh book in the Bark Bites horror series,
Yes, Bark Bites horror series.
which is
Um,
kind of like Goosebumps for grown-ups or a sexed up scary stories to tell in the dark. And that's called Dead Scalp, and that's one of the original splatter westerns back in print for the first time. That's coming out on July 29th. So definitely go and buy if you're watching this on any platform, go and buy Draw You In. And if you're watching this after July 29th, go and buy Dead Scalp as well.
right. And how can people get a hold of you?
Just about any you can order it from your local bookstore. You can go and order it from Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
I I
um,
I meant you personally.
you can I'm on Facebook, I'm on Blue Sky, I am on the social media site formerly known as Twitter.
Right.
I'm on Instagram and Threads. Just if you just look for Jasper Bark, but also go and stalk me on jasperbark.com. And if you want to join my mailing list, you get 4 free books for doing so. That again, there's a sign up form on my website, jasperbark.com. Please go and check it out.
It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
Been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, Alex. I'm so glad we finally got to do it. I know unfortunately flaked out on the first time, but I'm really, really glad that we finally got to do this.
Me too. And I would love to have a piece, a reprint for A Collective Paw.
I think I've got something for you.
Okay.
So I'll send that over in the next 24 hours.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jasper.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. See you soon.
See you very soon.